So today is all about how people behave in a crisis. So whether that's flooding, a storm, fire, pandemic, and I've got 8 thoughts that I'm going to share on how people behave, some of the things you can do in terms of in response to that, just to get you thinking a bit more about human behaviour in a crisis, and hopefully things that you don't necessarily know already. Some of it won't be new, a lot of it hopefully will be. So you'll be unsurprised to know that in a crisis, emotions can often win out over logic, and that's no surprise because something like 80% of our decisions are driven by emotions in normal times. So in a crisis, you imagine that that's something that really comes to the forefront. And for me, it's that kind of, in scientific terms, it's where you're kind of your cortisol and adrenaline suppress the kind of bit at the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, so your ability to reason is less than it would be normally. So in practical terms, that means it can be much more difficult to follow instructions. So thinking about how much information you give people is key, because if you give them too much, they will struggle to follow those instructions. Which leads on nicely to point number 2. So as you'll be aware, people do tend to temporarily freeze in emergencies. It's our brain thinking, I'm going to pause, I'm going to scan for threats. And you can get that decision paralysis. You're kind of cognitively overloaded. So again, it's thinking about when people are not thinking straight, not thinking particularly well, how much do you communicate and how much do you not communicate? So being very clear about having kind of simple comms. So this is a principle I talk a lot about, point number 3, which is all about the fact that we follow others. So this is a big thing in behavioural science, the whole principle about we follow others. And it's much truer in a crisis, especially. So whether that's fire, flooding, whatever it is, any crisis situation, a lot of the time our brain will assume that others know more. So if people around you are doing nothing, you're much more likely to do nothing as well. We're social creatures, so we like to follow the herd, which is why visible leadership is so important, because if people are demonstrating visible leadership and you're doing that in your organisations, that can make a big difference. About that kind of muscle memory. So in a crisis, one of the things we do is we rely on our automatic responses. So a habit is an automatic behaviour. It's when the brain stops fully participating in the decision-making process, helps us get by during the day, and is even more important in a crisis because we don't necessarily know what to do. Habits kick in. So what may happen in a flood, even if you say to someone, take this route, and we're likely to go down our usual route. So when there's uncertainty, habits can be much more dominant. Our brain will seek familiar patterns, routines, and things like that to deal with it. So that's something to think about. Think about what habits do we have in place when you're planning for crises. And also, we have lots of biases. So to get by in the day, we use all these kind of cognitive biases, which are shortcuts that help our brain process information. So Donald Trump is a good example of this and how he uses social media. And a lot of his supporters will share information, even if it's not necessarily true, because of confirmation bias. We look for information that supports beliefs that we already have, and that's a really common one. So if we take something like flooding, it could be a case of thinking, oh, well, it didn't flood last time, so it won't this time. So that's a good example of confirmation bias. Or in terms of cyber attacks, staff may often ignore early warning signs because they believe their systems are secure. So thinking about how you tackle those biases is key. And one of the ways you do that, point number 6, is all about trust. So if we believe in organisation, if we believe the messenger, if we believe the person that is giving us information, we are much more likely to act faster if we believe the source. And also conflicting messages can reduce trust and can lead to message rejection. So when it comes to trust, we need to believe the messenger, we need to believe the source, and then you need clear and consistent messaging. So sometimes it can be saying it's better to say we don't know something rather than risk saying something that's wrong, so you're not putting out conflicting messages, which leads on neatly to the next slide. So this is something I talk about a lot. We listen to those who we know, like, and trust the most. So when you're thinking about messengers and getting those ready for a crisis situation, it could be firefighters, it could be GPs, it could be the local shopkeeper, it could be the admin of a local WhatsApp group. And I've done loads of experiments with John Paul on the call about the types of things that work and don't work in terms of trusted messengers. And again, if someone says, do this, and you trust them, you're much more likely to do that than if you don't trust them. Okay, so coming back to an earlier point around cognitive overload, and this is really key. Because we're cognitively stretched, don't communicate too much. So often it's a case of thinking, what's the one thing you want people to do? So it could be in a flood, what is the evacuation route you want people to take, focusing on that and nothing else. Sometimes you need to communicate more than one thing. So chunking it up, visualizing it, there's loads on kind of how you explain instructions, showing the steps, not too many steps, infographics, loads of great research on how infographics that are easy to understand, not too busy, not too much colour, can be really useful. And an exercise I do is looking at what you've got on your kind of comms and sometimes taking stuff out, because at the end of the day, it's more important to get people to do one thing than communicate too many things and people do nothing. So that's something that's really worth bearing in mind. Haven't got time really to go through it today, but do have a look at this framework called COMBI, which is a really useful way to think about knowledge, the environment, attitudes, and the barriers around this, how you plan for emergencies, what people will do and not do. So in quite simple terms, here's a summary of some questions to think about. So how will people behave in a crisis or emergency situation? Where will they be? Who is it you need to target in terms of audiences, but also who are the trusted messengers? And when and where are people when you need them to make a choice? So these are all things to think about in your communications and planning. So if you want to find out more about what I talked about, you can scan the QR code on screen. So I offer free planning calls to talk through applying behavioural science to crisis situations. Also offer a free campaign planner with tips on how to use these principles. And this is all about tackling the challenges you face, how to apply behavioural science, how to drive positive behaviour change, and how to save money.